Erika Murdock, Balbuena, and thank you to Her Future Summit for having me. I am not sure where you are in your day, but I wanted to imagine all of you in a giant global women's circle. And I'm sharing a pretty personal story today, so I wanted to increase our connectedness. And I'd wondered if you'd join me in all of us taking a collective deep breath on the count of 3. So you ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. So just sink into where you are. I have a couple stories to tell you. Oftentimes we arrive at a major crossroads in our career at the same time that we face an equally enormous personal situation regarding motherhood. And it's really hard. And frankly, sometimes it just sucks. And we as women often feel very alone in these moments, truly, honestly, like we were the only and first person ever on this planet to face this predicament, when in reality, thousands of women make hard decisions about parenting and work all the time. So I'd like to share 2 stories today that coincide with both of my little girls. So there I stood in the garden of my parents' house holding my 1-month-old baby girl, Carmela, and fitting that this story takes place in a garden as her name is of a garden, Mount Carmel in the Bible. I was on the phone with my leader at the time who was calling to share lots of good news, one of which was that a role above me to lead the team was opening up in an executive function. And while this gave me a lot of great joy, it also left me having to decide if I wanted to go take on a very big job. And I had a moment of joy and frustration and mixed emotions as I thought about having to make this decision during my maternity leave. Would my mind be occupied by work and I would be less present with Carmela? What do I need to make this decision so that I have both foresight and insight? I was only the 3rd woman at my company to have a baby, and would I get support upon return? And while in all reality, I knew this was a very short period of time in my long life, it was a really important time, and how did I want to live those months? So I gathered my community. I reached out to a woman who was about 10 years older than I was, with an older child, as I wanted her perspective years later on what she remembered about that time of returning to work. Was it a blur or was it significant? I reached out to the woman who was the 2nd woman at our company to have a baby, her 2nd baby, and asked about what kind of support she received and what was pumping and working like, and would she change any of it? I was cautioned by both of these women and a few other mentors that there are a lot of unforeseen factors in motherhood and returning to work. Pumping can be challenging and overwhelming. You're still going through a slew of emotions, and returning to work, especially to something you love, may not have as much time as you did before because you have to get home or mentally you're just distracted. But I knew that I had an incredible partner and support system, a job that I loved, and I knew that as the woman I was, I needed to and wanted to work outside the home, and there would be unforeseen things ahead. I decided to explore the job and muddled through a meeting with my leader where I definitely did not bring my A game, but that was okay. And then I just sat with all of this information and listened to myself. And I thought of the delta between my confidence gap from where I was today and where I would need to step up for this role. And a little tiny voice inside of me just said, it is not the right time. I'm not sure that I could tell you why I didn't exactly end up taking this. It definitely didn't have anything to do with the support I received at work or at home. I just knew. And so because I said no, I actually ended up being able to add 2 women to my team who were and are some of the most incredible women I have ever had the opportunity to work with. And I grew and learned an immense amount during that time period, and I would not change a thing. But I want you to take 3 things away from this story. 1, build your community and build it now because they will show up for you when you need them. 2, try to get a feel for what the future is like from others who have been there. And 3, come back to yourself and listen and ask questions and live into the answers. What's the worst that can happen if you say yes? And what's the worst that can happen if you say no? Now let me tell you my 2nd story of Celine. I was early in my pregnancy with Celine, and I got a call from a friend, and my girls are 3 years apart, by the way. I got a call from a friend saying, I found your job, Erika, you need to go take this. Mind you, I was not even looking for an opportunity. I was super happy where I was, but this job looked and smelled like the dream job. And there were a few catches. I was pregnant, the job was in Seattle, And I was afraid and intimidated that I was not qualified or ready to take this on at this time. And we've all heard the statistic before that men take jobs when they're only 60% qualified, whereas women wait to be 100% qualified. And the stats are even more stark for women of color. But who is here to evaluate who is qualified for what? It was time to buck the trend. I felt like I had already learned my lesson, that career does not and will not wait for family to happen. And so my goal was going to be, I'm gonna at least get the offer. I prepared for that interview like it was an exam, with spreadsheets and Word docs and hours spent going over my life and experience. And the day of the interview, I started off with some yoga and an Adele and Beyonce dance party. Lizzo hadn't quite made it on my radar yet. And I went in and honestly, I didn't know how it went, but I guess I nailed it because I got the job offer the very next day. And then, oh crap, it was decision time. How could I possibly even consider a job that's in another city while I'm pregnant and my family is in San Francisco? But I had that same friend who referred me just looked me in the eyes and kept saying, I believe there's a way to make this work. So find yourself a friend who believes in you and your decisions, maybe even more than you do. So my husband and I began our dialogue about this over and over again. We built scenarios and talked through risks and upsides and spoke about moving or traveling and what all this would mean for the kind of family that we had wanted to create. I specifically asked my network to connect me with women who traveled constantly while pregnant or with little kids. I really didn't have many examples of this. I needed this hindsight and foresight. Women like Amy Nelson, who is speaking later today, and Kate Anderson from I Fund Women. But probably most importantly, I spoke to 2 women in my life who had teenage children. And I asked them to reflect back on this time, this shortest, longest time. What would my girls remember if I wasn't there during the week? What would I remember about this time? How hard was it going to be to get on and off a plane? And lastly, I figured out what I, Erika, would need to make this work. I held tight to my self-belief, and I was ready even if I was scared. And I knew that I would teach people how to treat me, which I believe for working parents and especially working mothers is probably the most important thing that we need to be doing, is teaching people how to treat us. So I said yes to the job because I have it right now. And I'm incredibly happy to report that almost 2 years later, it was 100% the right decision, and that my marriage and my relationship with my family and my girls is better than ever. It was an absolutely grueling first year. That's a talk for another day, but I wouldn't change it. And I made it work. My little friend kind of sat on my shoulder as a voice in my ear the whole time. And I did make it work. And so I'm now based out of San Francisco. And so from this story, I want to ask you, take away 3 things. 1, stop talking yourself out of things before you've been offered them. You cannot say yes to anything that has not been offered to you. Number 2, buck the trend. Take that job that you don't think you're 100% qualified for. You are way more ready than you think you are. And especially for working moms, teach people how to treat you. If you get clear on your priorities and you act accordingly, everyone will be better for it. So in closing, I want you to go out into the world knowing that you aren't alone. I know there were a lot of women and young mothers on the call as we shared our family situations today. And I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes I've discovered over the past 2 years by Carl Jung. Nothing has a greater influence psychologically on their environment and especially on their children than the unlived life of a parent. When I think of raising Celine and Carmela, it seems really hard for me to tell them to follow their dreams and be brave and courageous if I'm not modeling that for them in my words and my actions. And so I ask you today to go out into the world, not fearless, by all means be afraid and have fear, but courageous, whose definition, by the way, is not deterred by danger or pain. So surround yourself with an armor of self-belief and good friends, and you absolutely can do anything. Thank you.